Okay, great. So hello again, everyone. This is Ariel Porilis. I'm the head of product marketing at Rivery. I'm happy to have with me today Stephen Kim from NewView Analytics. Welcome, Stephen.
Everybody.
And thank you for joining us on today's topic about the Domo alternatives, how you can get more value out of your data stack. We have a nice agenda ready for you for today. Just before we dive into the agenda, a quick introduction of the speakers and who are we with. So as mentioned, my name is Ariel. I've been in the data space for 20 years now, actually, in different roles. I started as a data practitioner doing a data engineering, data visualization work. I moved on to be a solution architect within a software vendor of data visualization, BI tools, essentially, solutions. That was my first encounter with Domo. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And afterwards, I moved to do some data consulting. I've led a number of data consulting team, and now I'm with Rivery. If you don't know Rivery, so Rivery is a data integration a SaaS ELT tool. We were founded in 2019. We were founded around the concept of providing very easy to use managed integration to a lot of different data sources that typically are required to put together your data stack. As we develop those integrations, we realized that there's more to just the connectors. We'll talk about that later on. We grew quite nicely, lots of customers worldwide, and one of the things that we kept in our DNA ever since our creation was definitely a focus on our customer success. We were founded by ex-data consultants, and as a result, I think that they kind of stayed in the way we like to interact with our customers. We are now with $50 million of funding, and we continue in our journey as we scale up to more and more customers worldwide. Just a little bit about the platform, and I'll turn it over to Stephen. So Rivery, as I mentioned, is a modern data integration platform. The roots was around the ingestion, being able to connect to many different applications, SaaS APIs, doing database replications via CDC or batch, being able to connect to a source that we don't offer natively with the option to create custom connections with or without AI. We can also help with file replications or do a streaming of webhooks. All this data flows into your data warehouse. Could be a Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks, Redshift, Athena, data lakes, whatever storage layer you have. This is where we flow data into, and then you can transform it, usually using SQL or Python. And once that's done, you can even activate the data and push it back into operational systems. That could be either refreshing BI tools that will be consuming the data from the warehouse, could be pushing data into maybe AI applications, or even reverse detailing data into business applications. All of that process is orchestrated by Rivery. We'll talk about that later on, but just a quick kind of a staging set for those who are new to Rivery. So with that, I'll pass on to Stephen to introduce himself and NewView.
Hey everybody, my name's Steven. I'm a technical lead here at NewView Analytics. I've been in the data space for about 8 years now. Started in the financial services industry and kind of worked my way into NewView Analytics with the analytics consultancy here. So at NewView, we're a data analytics consultancy. We primarily service or deliver to PE-backed middle market companies, although that's what we focus on. We've worked on a number of different companies outside of that scope. But the reason why we've found this as our niche is that with middle market companies, we found that they're formidable in size, but they still kind of lack the resources to implement any kind of data stack or analytics solution while still using all these different data sources, and have a difficult time kind of coming up with the holistic data solutions for insights. And at NewView, we've kind of come up with this 16-week program where we're able to assess what's going on with your data, what kind of data sources are you using, what's important to you guys, what kind of metrics are important to implementing a data ingestion tool with partners like Rivery, a data warehouse, and then also a dashboarding solution in Power BI, Tableau, etc. We also have a wide breadth of industry experience, anything from multi-site healthcare services to SaaS technology. And this is just a list of some of the clients that we've worked with and the PE groups that we've worked with. One thing I will note, it's on the bottom right corner there, due to confidentiality, we are not able to share every client that we've worked with, nor every PE group that we've worked with.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so with that, as promised, we have a nice agenda for today. We'll be covering a little bit more about the Domo and how it came about, and talk a little bit about the challenges we've seen with maintaining Domo solutions today, and what are some of the alternatives you can consider. And we'll wrap it up with how to migrate and our lesson learns. I will say, feel free to type in questions through the Q&A panel as we go along. We'll try to cover those throughout, but definitely we'll leave time at the end to address all of your questions. So feel free to type those, and we'll do our best to answer those as much as we can. This webinar is recorded. We'll definitely share the recording for you as well after the webinar is over. Okay, so with that, let's dive into it. And we'll start with this nice image. I promise this was not generated by AI. This is an image that we saw a while back. So Domo was founded originally in 2015, and the way they launched or came to the market was under stealth mode at the beginning. So there was a lot of buzz and kind of rumors around what Domo is doing, but no one really knew what's happening there. It was a kind of marketing tactics that they took, and when they launched finally and came out of stealth mode, there was a big production around it. You can see this visual is actually from a video with Alec Baldwin, where they've kind of officially came about and started telling the world what is Domo. It's a pretty cool video. You can watch it. You can search for it on Google and you'll find it. You will see that Domo actually came out of stealth mode twice, not once, which is unusual. I've yet to hear many companies doing that twice. Again, another marketing tactics, very strong on the marketing side. But this one is definitely one of my favorites, kind of corporate videos to watch. So if you have a moment afterwards, I encourage you to search for this video. So this was the kind of the first time I was exposed to what Domo is about. Back then, I was working for a data visualization software vendor, if you will, a direct competitor of Domo at the time. And when they came to market, I think the biggest claim to fame was around a very large number of connectors to many different applications, which was not that common back in the days for BI tools. And then mostly focusing on the visual side, providing dashboarding solutions, providing different visualizations to be able to see the data on top of those different connectors. We heard some rumors around kind of data being stored in a proprietary database on the Domo side. Some of the rumors kind of mentioned this database was a Vertica flavor. If you are familiar with Vertica, which is a database that's not that popular these days anymore, but back then in the days was known to be one of the big data databases, a type that could host large volumes of data. But it was mostly in the concept of connectors moving very quickly to visuals. That's the way we've seen it. And I think it was mostly competing in that space, competing with vendors like Tableau and later on Power BI and the likes. So when I was doing a bit more research about it, I was surprised to see that there was more components to it, going beyond that, especially kind of that magic ETL layer. And that's kind of when I turned to Stephen, kind of to learn more about that. So Stephen, if you don't mind, kind of sharing a little bit more about kind of your understanding of the additional components.
Yep. So kind of like Ariel had mentioned, started with the visuals, but then I think they realized that they need to be a little bit more beyond that. And so they've added a few more components to their tool, one being the Magic ETL tool, which is a GUI-based drag and drop, like step by step, doing the different transformations to ultimately come up with a table or data set that you could build visuals off of. But also they've added things like data science components so that you can enable a Python, like a Jupyter notebook, to do some Python code in to kind of enable that ML, AI type of functionality, forecasting, things like that. And then also data engineering. They allow the building of custom connectors They've allowed kind of like the custom API type of build out outside of those 1,000+ connectors. And then building in things like analytics apps where you have multiple dashboards that are kind of all in one place that you can have as like an application for um, your company.
Cool. Let's say obviously a pretty deep coverage of kind of the end-to-end kind of analytics cycle from the sources all the way to the consumption layer. Quite impressive, usually reserved to a kind of the big cloud providers like Azure and maybe Google with their suite of services that fulfill those different components. It's not common to see one vendor that can do all of that. So definitely kind of a jack of all trades approach, I guess, based on saying that. So maybe that's a good segue to talk a little bit about the challenges of what we've seen with maintaining Domo today. And maybe we can take it by starting going one level deeper into the architecture of Domo that powers all those products that we saw earlier. So again, the components I was familiar with when I was
Sure, I can help with this. First, please unlock your phone.
The components I was familiar with when I was with a different BI vendor was mostly on the Explorer side, the dashboards and the visuals, and again, the connectors. And that's where the rumors about a proprietary database, which I assume is what they call Adrenaline, kind of hosting under the scenes. A lot of components here, Stephen. I'll let you kind of take it away from here and kind of walk us through this. Stephen, I think you're on mute still.
Sorry about that. I think one thing that Ariel had mentioned is that there's a lot of different components, and Domo being a jack of all trades tool, I think the term that kind of comes after that is oftentimes master of none. So we've definitely come across different challenges in the data ingestion, the data transformation, data warehousing, and also the data visualization. So Ariel, if you want to go to the next slide. Awesome. So yeah, the big thing here is on the data ingestion side, the connectors could be missing some data, and I'll talk about that in a second. And it's hard to manage incremental loads. So going back to the missing key data, one example of something that was actually quite big in the end was we were using the Shopify connector with one of our clients, specifically the orders endpoint. And we found that with that data, we could never make it validate with the report that we're getting out of Shopify. And we later found out that the Domo connector doesn't bring in discount information. And so it's really hard to reconcile, but we've kind of had to live with the fact that, okay, the Shopify data that's in Domo, it's just going to be missing discount information. We're going to have that add that in afterwards. And then with the incremental loads, I have this screenshot here, but there are some connectors that have an upsert or like a merge functionality, but actually a large number of connectors have exactly these two options, replace or append. So replace, if you have a data set that you're kind of pulling in all the data every single time, that replace is fine. But oftentimes with large transactional data sets, that's not possible. Like you're going to be pulling the last day, the last 7 days, last 30 days, and you're going to have to do some kind of upsert to that. So with Domo, a challenge that we've encountered is that we'd have to do a workaround where we pull the last day, 7 days, 30 days of data, but then have to build like a data flow, an ETL, magic ETL thereafter to do that recursive nature of taking the last 30 days and then appending or upserting it into an existing larger data set to get that full information. Another challenge, thank you, is there are APIs, unfortunately, there are standards to them, but there are a lot of difficult to implement APIs to get data out of. And there are scenarios where the Domo has a JSON no-code connector where that specific connector that's supposed to handle the non-stock connector integrations is just not powerful enough. And so you have to build a custom connector. And it's nice that Domo does allow that functionality where you can build that custom connector. However, it's all in JavaScript, so you now have to have someone that has that JavaScript experience, that software engineering experience. And then on top of that, after you build the connector, it takes 2 to 4 weeks for Domo to approve. And so it's elongating your development cycle, kind of as an extra pain point. All right, and then now moving on to the data transformations. Magic ETLs, I think, was a great addition to Domo. It offered this no-code solution for a lot of powerful transformations that you can do to your data. However, there's a little bit of a limited control over the data transformations. You're kind of, whatever you get within Domo's Magic ETL is what you get. And if there's anything custom beyond that that you need, you often have to go through large workarounds or just can't do it. An example, and then also on top of that, with every single transformation that you make, you can't repeat it in another Magic ETL, you have to rebuild it. So that's just like an extra pain point. Whereas if you were to use SQL, you could create a user-defined function where it's now templatized and modular, where you can use that on your subsequent stored procedures or SQL statements, right? And just copy paste. And kind of to talk about that a little bit, SQL data flows are available in Domo, but they are often very slow. Actually, Domo, I had a separate conversation with the Domo success rep on this, but they've always referred me to use the Magic ETL when possible. Domo actually recommends that you use Magic ETL over SQL for mostly improvements on speed, just because that SQL data flow is really, really slow. Okay, and then with now going to data storage or data warehousing. So 2 things here. Data is not very well organized in Domo. If you're used to a traditional data warehouse, your warehouse is organized by database, all the different schemas, all the different tables, views, etc. However, in Domo, it's kind of all just one big place, right? Where you have to search and have to go find your tables, and there's no real organization to it. Of course, there's like filters where you can filter by like a source type, right? If it was derived from a data flow, or if it was derived from like a JSON no-code connector or a CSV load, etc. And then also there's tags. But in the end, it's nowhere nearly as organized as a traditional data warehouse. And then also, Domo doesn't, the way that it's warehoused is it doesn't really enable you to do this dimensional data modeling that's important on the visualization side. So where you may have sets of DIMs and fact tables that play together to create a data model in like a Power BI, Tableau, Sigma, that's not available in Domo. And that can end up being a challenge on the visualization if you want to filter by like a specific field. Now that specific field has to be in every single one of your tables that you're going to visualize in one dashboard. Otherwise, you can't actually filter by that field. Whereas in a dimensional data model where you have DIMs that are connected to a specific fact table, that DIM, as long as it's connected to the fact, you can always filter by that DIM. And I see Ariel move to the next slide. Specifically for data visualizations, simple visualizations are easy. I think Domo did a really good job of trying its best to find every type of visual that someone might create and kind of create a little visualization for it. But anything beyond that simple visual, it often falls short. So this is a very real example here where it's a time series chart for on-time delivery percentage by product category. And each product category has the same axes, and you can kind of just see it in one visualization. This is in Power BI, it's called a line chart with small multiples, and that small multiples is that product category. If you were to want to build this in Domo, you would have to build one line chart with either a filter where you filter through each of the different visuals or different product categories, sorry, or you'd create a line chart for every single product category, or you just switch the visualization altogether and maybe come up with something that's suboptimal, like a table, to compare that on-time delivery percentage. Next slide, please.
Yeah, that's quite consistent with what I remember seeing back in the days. Definitely being able to kind of build simple visuals and self-serve from those data sets if you can find the right data set. But going further was one of the reasons why some customers were challenging Domo around the abilities to really serve the unique requirements around the way they want to deliver data to consumers. So yeah, that's a good example. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then one really big thing also with visualizations that's a challenge is performance isn't always that great, nor is it easy to tune. So this is actually another very real example where the stock Domo color rules actually didn't fit our needs, where it just didn't do what we needed it to do. And so the alternative is Domo has a HTML table type where or visualization type where you can add in HTML rules like colors, and it'll implement that in the table. So this code is actually not that complicated. It's just a couple case when statements. But when implementing this in that HTML table, it went from a visual that loads almost instantaneously to taking 15 to 30 seconds. Now, that 15 to 30 seconds is ultimately not that much time, but when you need data like immediately so that you can send out a board deck or you can send out an email with how you're doing currently, that 15 to 30 seconds can be a bit of a nuisance. And if you have multiple tables that are 15 to 30 seconds, you're just kind of looking at a screen waiting for everything to load. Next slide, please. Awesome. And then finally, related to data management, I think having a data warehouse, you can have a lot of different things connect to that data warehouse to do your data needs thereafter. However, with Domo, because it's all kind of a contained system, Domo doesn't have a connector for like Excel. So if you need to like look at data in an Excel, that's fine. But if you need to connect to other things, there are connectors where you can push data from Domo to a system. But if Domo doesn't have that connector available, the only way to do that, what's called a write back, is you have to create a custom connector, similar to like the data ingestion. To push data out, if it's not already available, you have to create that custom connector. And then also, talking about Domo consumption, not very intuitive compared to like having an ingestion tool, understanding like with like Rivery, for example, the RPUs, or with Snowflake, the credits based on how the time that you're on Snowflake. With Domo, there's all these different types of executions or consumption line items that ultimately add up to your final credit consumption count. And Ariel has this web page here to show that it's not just those 5 rules, there's a ton more. So ultimately, it's very difficult to figure out, like in the end, what your final cost is going to be.
And that's a recent change in the model, right?
Yep. So actually, something that why we have current clients that are on Domo wanting to move out of Domo is because of this move to a consumption where it's not. It wasn't as simple as the user licensing. Now they've gone to this consumption where they're trying to bill for every single one of their different components that they have accessible to the public.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that was the main driver where we saw a lot of Domo customers now starting to investigate different alternatives. I think that was the starting point. All of a sudden, a confusion around the way that it's going to be priced. And then that surfaced a lot of those other limitations you talked about earlier. It is something that I'm responsible for pricing at Rivery, and I reviewed and analyzed multiple pricing models. I can say this one, it's not easy to follow when you try to really kind of create an estimate or forecast of your cost. I'm not sure how they really do that, but a lot of rules behind this thing. Okay, so maybe that's a good way to a good segue to get into the alternatives. And maybe I can start here and pass over to you, Stephen, in a moment. But this is obviously a somewhat similar, but fundamentally different approach to the way you would architect your data. So similar flow of data, you have your sources you would ingest, you have your storage layer, you would model your data, and then your consumption layer. But I think what's a bit different comparing to the Domo approach. The Domo approach is targeting maybe a bit more, favoring a bit more the visual layer, and I think you've demonstrated that nicely in the way data is stored. It's not a dimensional model necessarily. It's a bit more of a set of different data sets essentially that users need to find and then can visualize in Domo. If you look at this architecture, and I know there's a lot of logos here, I'll get into that in a moment, but the key point here is that this is centered around your data warehouse. Essentially, your storage layer could be a lakehouse as well in Databricks, but essentially the main area here that everything works around is your warehouse. Could be a Snowflake, could be Databricks, BigQuery, Redshift, whatever you choose. And the reason it works this way is because all those different tools and all those different components really talk to each other mostly via SQL. So you have something like Rivery taking care of the ingestion of data from different sources, kind of like similar to the connect layer of Domo, but maybe giving you a bit more flexibility around the way you would ingest the data, which is, I think, one of the things that Stephen was showing earlier. So for example, being able to reach the Shopify data at the right granularity, or being able to create custom connectors in case there's a certain source that your organization is using that is not available natively. And then bringing all that data into Snowflake, and from there being able to model it and transform it using, again, Rivery or other tools like dbt. But the key point here is that it's all based on SQL. So it's very portable. If you choose to move to a dbt, and use SQL in dbt, moving on tomorrow to doing those transformations in Snowflake directly is very easy. It's just a question of copy-pasting the same SQL queries and adapting them to your processes in Snowflake, in opposed to now having to work on a proprietary interface that you have with the GUI experience of the Magic ETL, and then essentially locking your IP, essentially your business logic rules in that layer. The same thing works with the way you would activate data, the way you would push it back and feed it back into operational systems such as a Salesforce or Slack, or maybe even into AI tools like Amazon Q. You can essentially query data from the Snowflake warehouse or from whatever storage layer you have in SQL, and then push it back easily into the systems. So users don't have to necessarily consume it in the BI layer, but they can also get it directly in the operational tools where they operate. So the key principles of this entire architecture, as you look at it as a whole, is again centering that around the data warehouse, which is the place where you can bring data together and then really join it across system and reach it. Now with fantastic AI tools that we have built into those platforms, Snowflake, for example, offer Cortex, Google BigQuery has Vertex. They all have different ML components and AI components that you can just trigger with SQL. So simple SQL functions give you the option to enrich the data and analyze it with generative AI. And then you can then easily consume it via whatever BI tool you want to use. So tools like Tableau, Power BI, Sigma as well, which makes it much, much easier to then explore and consume it because of the way you model the data in those storage layers. And lastly, I think the other important principle to mention here is the fact that those tools are nicely integrated together. Native integration of those tools, that kind of makes it very easy to put this architecture together and benefit from an easy-to-use experience, but still combined together a stack that's really powerful in each one of the components it's handling. So each tool here really does a great job in that specific area that it's covering. Stephen, I'll pass it back to you to maybe you mentioned a few comments about those different points. I think you're drawing back on experience from a certain project or a number of projects you're working on. This is one example of those. You want to maybe walk us through a little bit of that project and the outcomes of it?
Yep. You'll see here, Brandon Grasky, he's one of the colleagues of mine. He's actually the person who managed this project, but it was with a leading apparel brand. The thing with them is they had, before we even started helping them develop in Domo, they've already had a ton of stuff built. And the big problem that they had was trust in the data. They didn't really know what they could trust, so they kind of brought us in to restart in Domo. But what we found is after restarting in Domo, the data still couldn't be trusted because things were tying out. I kind of alluded to that a little earlier in our discussion. So for example, Shopify discounts was something that was not included in the Shopify data connector in Domo. And so none of the numbers really tied out, but we were able to help come in and figure that that was actually the component that was missing. So I think with that project, there was a big lack of trust in the data. And then the second thing is with some of the connectors, because of the amount of data that we needed to pull, it often took quite a bit of time to pull that data. And in the end, it reports that needed to get sent out to the leadership team, to the operations team, it was like very last minute. And so if anything broke in the process, reporting would be very delayed. And then also, in the end, I think there was just a little bit of a lack of knowledge in how to develop and what's right to develop. And so there was just a lot of different Domo dashboards that were built and different data sets that were built, which probably led to that lack of trust as well. So when we came in, we worked in Domo, but then quickly realized after Domo switched to the consumption model that this company that we were working with wanted to shift from Domo to something different. And so we went through an evaluation process to figure out, based on the data sources that they want to ingest, and what tools they may be comfortable with visualizing in the future, their data stack and the plan to implement that. So on the right here, you'll see that there's their main data sources were Google Analytics, Google Ads, Shopify, as well as a couple of custom API connections that were not available in Domo. Actually, they were not native connectors in Rivery either, but we were able to use Rivery's REST action connector to build that API connection. But the outcomes were using Rivery, we were able to get all the holistic Shopify data. So there was no longer that discrepancy of not having discounts, and things were able to reconcile, which was a big win for our client. There was a 7.5x faster processing time. So with using Rivery as the ingestion tool and using Snowflake as a data warehouse, things were running a lot quicker than when everything was in Domo. And so we were able to deliver reports in the early morning versus like in the afternoon. That was also a really big win for our client. And then cutting development time, because they brought us in who brought Nuvie Analytics in, where we have this expertise to build in this modern data stack, development time for when they needed something to operationalizing it cut significantly. And then finally, with Domo's new consumption model, their prices skyrocketed. And so you going to this modern data stack where Rivery as specifically for the ingestion tool and specializing in ingestion, Snowflake specializing in data warehousing, and then Power BI for visualization, we're able to reduce costs by 83%.
That's mind-boggling, this number alone. But yeah, that's phenomenal. I remember following this project from the side, obviously just from the Rivery perspective, and kind of seeing the custom connectors you've built and the orchestration processes, but kind of seeing the whole story together is really, really impressive. So maybe you can kind of walk us through a little bit of that migration process. What are some of the key lessons learned, and how do you approach this type of migration when you go into a future project like that?
Yep, for sure. Excuse me. I think the biggest thing here was historical data. So with some of the data connectors, and this is not a limitation on Domo or Reverie side, it's more with the vendor itself, or the source itself. We're not able to pull like before a certain point. So I think Google Ads, for example, is one of those sources where you can only pull back, I think, 2 or 3 years, and then anything beyond that is not available to query. But because our client was with Google Ads for quite a bit of time, or utilized Google Ads for quite a bit of time and had that data in Domo for a little while, we were able to download that data from Domo and push it into Snowflake. But with the two different connectors, and this is kind of a tie-in with the next point as well, but with the two different connectors in Domo and Reverie, just making sure that the historical data with the new data map together, or kind of coming up with like a similar schema for the tables to make sure we don't lose information, but then also like we're reporting at the same granularity was super important. And it did take a little bit of planning and a little bit of time, but that is something that we learned, is that data is not always the same when coming from different systems. And when we want to grab historicals, there are some systems that don't let you grab like the full history of when you're with the specific platform.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We see it actually even sometimes within the same systems that are going through upgrades. One of the recent comments we've seen now is with NetSuite. We have customers that have been using a NetSuite for a while, and NetSuite over time introduced a new storage system under the hood called NetSuite 2, which stores data completely differently than the NetSuite 1. And so kind of that historical data mapping is quite a challenge when you move from one to the other. In NetSuite, fortunately, you can pull the history from the new structure as well. You still have an exercise of kind of mapping and validating, you're getting the same results from both sources. But I can see that being certainly an important task in the project when you do that migration. Thank you for bringing this one up. You said that connects to this one. I can see how, yeah.
Yeah, and so you'll see here, this is just the docs from Domo for the Shopify connector, and then the available different reports from Reverie. And you'll see that there are some similarities, but there are differences in the types of data that you're able to pull. And so just one thing we had to do is we had to take some time to understand the data that's coming through the Shopify connector in Domo and with Reverie, and where things kind of align with each other, where things are a little bit different and things are maybe additional. It took a little bit of time to understand like the differences and like where they can kind of come together. I think that was a big lesson learned, as well as within the tables themselves, like the orders data with the discounts, just making sure we understand like the holistically the data in a specific table is what we expect as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can, as a vendor of data integration, I can totally understand this point. The challenge that we face as providers of those managed integrations, that the integrations themselves are not static. So we can build a Shopify connector, but then Shopify adds continuously, they add more entities on their end, more endpoints, APIs essentially that can be called to bring more data into your reporting layer or into your integration processes. And so we have a constant effort to keep on updating and make sure those integrations are up to date. So I can certainly see how that could vary from one environment to the other. We have a team dedicated for make sure those connectors are up to date, and we also make sure that our integrations are trying to handle those upgrades as smoothly as possible as the API versions of those sources change, because they keep on adding fields that could maybe break downstream pipelines. We try to make sure that this is as seamless as possible. There's a schema drift management and whatnot in place to make sure that from a user perspective that's smooth. But yeah, with that ever-changing landscape on the integration side, I can see how that can certainly create variations between two different tools. Even though they have similar connectors, it's not necessarily giving you the same output. So that's a good point. Thank you for that one.
Awesome. And then finally, using Domo and having Domo even encourage you to use the Magic ETL. All the transformations, or almost all the transformations, will be done in that drag and drop interface. And so one thing that we learned is there needs to be somebody that knows Domo and that knows SQL to help with this transition process. Originally, we had a team member who wasn't as familiar with Domo, but was really strong in SQL. And ultimately, we had to bring in someone that had that dual experience from doing that migration, because although Domo transformations are easy to understand, there's nuances, right, to those different tools. And so just having someone that's an expert or intermediate to expert in both and can understand how to do both is really important. Yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing there too. Awesome. And then this is an example of that timeline that was alluded to kind of when I was introducing Nuvie Analytics. And the timeline we followed follow for most of our implementations. So it starts with a data and tool review. So what kind of data are you using? I'm sure the folks that are in this call are listening might be using Domo, and we'll want to know like all the different data sources that you're using, the reports that you're using, right? Just kind of at a high level, pre-kickoff. And then once we kick off, we'll do an actual like intensive data discovery process where we'll be interviewing a multitude of different stakeholders, understanding that the data that they use, the metrics that are important to them, the KPIs, right? How they're even looking at the data. They might be looking at Domo, grabbing the table from Domo, downloading it, putting it to an Excel, right? Or they might just be looking at it in Domo or a different visualization tool. And then finally, going into that ELT development and implementation. So building the pipelines in with the modern data architecture ingestion tool like Rivery, building those rivers or pipelines from raw data source to data warehouse like Snowflake, and then going into the visual development. So one thing that we want to iterate with NewView is that with visualization, especially, input is very important, and that iterative process is very important, getting that feedback. So coming up with the multiple different drafts, making sure that the client is comfortable with the visualizations that they see and data is validated and what they expect. And then finally, I know I mentioned our process is 16 weeks. The first 2 weeks of that deploy and train is making sure everything's productionalized and everything is in the workspace working as intended. And then that last couple of weeks, that 17 and 18, is to actually like train the users, all of the end users, to make sure that they're comfortable with utilizing the new tools. One thing I will say is if the data infrastructure and if especially if they're a client of ours already and we've built a lot of the stuff for them in a tool like Domo, this timeline shortens almost by half because we'll understand the logic that goes into a lot of this, and we can implement a solution a lot quicker.
Fantastic. Okay, I think that's very clear. I like this approach as a former data consultant. I think the data discovery phase is so important. So yeah, definitely being able to speed that up with Domo and knowledge is key. Okay, so we're at the questions time. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing those insights and for walking us through this experience. We'll open up the floor now for a few questions. Feel free to type those in the Q&A panel. I see there's already a couple of questions coming in. I think these are all questions for you, Stephen. I'll ask you the first question. So the question is, what did the migration look like from a licenses ROI perspective? Considering there's multiple tools involved in the in the modern approach versus the one Domo tool. How did you go about a kind of estimating cost, and how you could kind of expect a shift in license cost when you tool together all those different tools together?
Yep, that's a good question. I think I mentioned a little bit in that success story, but with that specific client, they got a huge sticker shock because Domo, the way that their licensing worked before is per user, and I think it's row count. And as long as you kind of fit within that bounds, you were okay. And so it was kind of encouraged to build as much as you want, run as much as you want, do as much as you want, and even incur like some tech debt. So when the call from Domo came to our client saying that they wanted to switch to this consumption model, there was actually a huge sticker shock. They got a 300K invoice or potential invoice saying if you wanted to continue with the way you are, it'll cost 300K to stay with Domo for the year. And so we were already on board at that point, and we kind of assessed, and it actually ended up where just starting a new tool set, even including our consulting services, it would be cheaper to start anew. So I think the number was 83% reduction in costs. So the tool cost licensing went from 300K to about 50K with 3 different tools.
Oh, phenomenal. Okay, thank you. Second question here. Okay, this one's, I guess, a continuation of the first question. So with a few vendors involved, what was the vendor experience going through this migration process, as you now need to deal with, I guess, in your case, Rivery, dbt, Snowflake, and Power BI? How did you go about that?
Yeah, so I think that the big thing is Newbie already had experience in all of those different tools, so it wasn't that difficult to start implementing in each of those different tools. However, there are times where we have questions, and there are things that we just don't know how to do in a specific tool. Specifically, I think ingestion is like the one that we always have a tricky time with. But I will say Rivery, and I don't want to toot you guys' horn, but I think Rivery really does care about their customers, and even beyond like the initial onboarding, the support has always been there for us. And so we've asked a ton of questions to you guys, and you guys were able to, within a day, 2 days, come up with answers or solutions or a path forward at least, where I think with Domo, because we've also onboarded some clients onto Domo, they really care about you during onboarding and a couple months after. And I don't know if the attendees on the call kind of agree with that. But then after that, that customer support or care really falls off, and it oftentimes takes weeks to escalate to like a technical support rep where they can actually help you with whatever you're going through. But we've kind of seen that ongoing support with a tool or with a partner or tool like Rivery beyond the onboarding of that couple months.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'll mention that from my perspective, I think, the combination of tools we talked about, Rivery, dbt, Snowflake, it's all, as I mentioned earlier around the architecture slide, it's all around SQL. So the learning curve for most of those tools is not that high. As long as you know SQL, you can relatively quickly get into those tools and start operating. The interfaces are pretty straightforward, being kind of tools that were developed in last few years. So it's kind of using a kind of a best practice for ease of use and onboarding tactics to make it easier for users to get into those tools. And so kind of maybe eliminating a little bit the proprietary knowledge you need to learn when there's a kind of complex GUI or whatnot to set up. So I think that's one of the other things we've seen from many other projects as customers are onboarding it. Fantastic. Okay, I think I think we have no more questions. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Stephen, for your partnership. I appreciate sharing the insights from a kind of real life experience, diving into the migrations and implementations. I know those projects are always a bit intimidating at first, but kind of being able to deliver those within 16 weeks is quite phenomenal. So I'm really happy to see this result. And going forward, if you are considering this type of migration, obviously feel free to reach out to Stephen or myself. We'll be happy to answer and address any questions we can help you with, and see if that's a viable path for your analytics strategy going forward. So thank you again, Stephen, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Ariel.
Bye for now.